Hey, Motorman here. I'm trying something different. I'm going to give you my feelings on a subject, and I asked folks about this to comment on if they'd like to hear this story, and a lot of people said they would, so here goes. And the question is, it's what I put to show you what this video is about. Did Harley Davidson rip you off? Well, the fact is, unless you walked into a Harley Davidson dealership and the salesman came and he put a gun to your head and he dragged you in and said, point to the one you want, and that's the one you're going to get, and you're going to buy it, and you're going to pay $5,000 over list price to get it. I don't think that happened to anybody. In fact, did that happen to anybody here? Yeah, you in the back there with your hand up. They put a gun to your head? Oh, you just want the bathroom. It's down the hall to the right. Now, come on, that never happened. But I know that a lot of people got pissed off because of what the dealerships were doing in the heyday of Harley Davidson. And the heyday was actually about from 1995 until about 2005. And that's when the dealers practically had a license to print money. They were making all kinds of cash. But I'm going to start from before then, back in, and I wrote down a couple of dates. Back in 1984, Harley Davidson had purchased the company back from AMF. Some of the Harley investors got together and they came out in '84 with the Evolution motor, and they finally had a really good motor that was reliable. Wasn't a ton of power, but it had a lot of torque. It was a reliable motor. It didn't vibrate too much on some of the models, but it was a good bike. Sales started to pick up. From about 1981 to '84, there was a downturn in the market for all motorcycles. I really don't know why that was. It was as if somebody turned a switch off. But in 1984, business started to pick up. Harley Davidson had the Evo motor introduced, and they came out with the Heritage Classic. And what Harley Davidson was figuring is there was a nostalgia craze going on, and they wanted to take a Harley Davidson motorcycle that looked like the classic American motorcycle from the 1950s and put modern running gear in it. That's exactly what they did with the Evolution motor and the Harley Heritage, and sales really started to pick up. By 1990, they came out with the Fat Boy. That was a really hot model. There was much more demand than there was production. So people really wanted that model. And in fact, I think it was Arnold Schwarzenegger used the Fat Boy in the Terminator movie, and sales went through the roof. That's when they started with putting your name on a list in order to get the motorcycle. It's simply supply and demand. People wanted it, they couldn't get it, they would do anything to get it, almost anything. And Harley Davidson dealers now, they started really, maybe some people call it gouging people. I don't really think it's gouging, it's because you have a choice. You could either buy it or you don't. So they started to, with $1,000, you had to put your $1,000 down, put your name on a list, and then wait 6, maybe 8 months to get the motorcycle, sometimes up to a year. And Harley Davidson, the company, knew that this was happening, that dealers were charging over MSRP. And in order to not really do something about that, but to at least let people know that it wasn't the Harley Davidson Motor Company who was gouging on the price. They said the bike is worth 15 grand, you're paying 20 grand. Well, they started listing the MSRP in all their brochures, and they were the only manufacturer to do that. So people at least would know what Harley Davidson Company said the motorcycle is worth. What you're willing to pay for it, that's a different story. And what the dealer wants to mark up on it, and you're still willing to pay for that, that's supply and demand. About 1995, it got to where people were just, the demand so outweighed supply that people were paying $1,500 now to get on a list. And I know there was a dealer here in Clearwater where you had to put $1,500 down, and that was just to get your name on the list. That money didn't go towards the purchase price of the motorcycle, believe it or not. So if the bike was $15,000, now you put $1,500 down, and then they required that once the bike came in, you had to put $2,000 or $3,000 worth of accessories on the motorcycle. Well, yeah, of course, you could pick the accessories that you wanted, but you had to do that. If you didn't do that, you're out the door, and you weren't getting your $1,500 back. And they had a whole list of people that were willing to do that. So if you didn't want it, somebody else did. And this, it's the free market. If you're willing to pay that extra money for the motorcycle, the dealer would be stupid not to do that. I remember, if this used to happen in the car business, in fact it still does, but I remember back in 1965, my father wanted to buy a Volkswagen Beetle. Now at the time, the Beetle was very popular, people wanted it. I think they cost about $1,700 brand new back then. So I go down to the dealership with my father. I'm just a little kid, and he's looking for, they have one Volkswagen Beetle on the floor. And the guy says, we can't sell you this one. It's promised to somebody else. And it was the same thing. You had to put your name on a list, and I think it was $500 deposit. It did go towards the price of the Beetle when it came in, but you had no choice of what color. Whatever came in, if you didn't take that, they had a list of 100 people that would take it, and they were jacking up the price to about $2,000. Well, that's the free market. If you're willing to pay that kind of money for it, why should the dealer not charge that money? Right now we got a housing boom going on in some markets. People have put their house up for sale for $200,000. Then the people bid on it, and somebody offers $220,000 for it. You're going to tell me you're not going to take the $220,000? You're only going to take the $200,000? Well, I don't know too many people who do that. You'd be foolish not to take the extra money. And the dealers thought the same way. Now, as far as a long-range business plan, it's not too good to do that. It would have been much better if all the dealers just charged MSRP, but that wasn't the way it was. And people were willing to pay this kind of money, sometimes $10,000 or more over list price. And now, of course, things have changed, and people are actually angry at Harley dealers, and some of them think it was the company's fault, but it was actually the dealers who were doing this. And it got to where now the supply has well met demand. But back then, 1990 to about 2005, you could walk into a Harley dealership, and they might have 1 or 2 motorcycles for sale. And they would have 5 or 10 used motorcycles, but brand new ones, no, they had all kinds of clothes and all kinds of accessories, but they didn't even have a bike to sell you. So that, of course, made the prices go up. People willing to pay the extra price, and they did, and they came up with all kinds of things to make you, not make you purchase the bike, but they came up with all kinds of ideas to make it more, as difficult as possible and get the most amount of money from the customer. I've heard all kinds of stories. I know somebody, and this is a true story because I was with this guy when he did it. A friend of mine, and I think it was in 2000, he wanted to buy a Harley Springer. So back in '99, he puts down his $1,000 deposit. It was a local dealer. He puts down a $1,000 deposit. They tell him it's going to be 6 months to a year before we get the bike. He says that's fine. He wants a particular color. I think it was purple that he wanted. And he's waiting and waiting. 8 months go by. Nothing. The dealer can't even tell him when the motorcycle is coming in. Well, this guy finds out that there's a dealer in Tampa who actually has the motorcycle that he wants in the color he wants. So I go down there with him, and there's the bike, and it's the purple Springer. It's exactly what he wants. And at this time, the dealers would not sell you a motorcycle unless you had a Harley Davidson to trade in. Another crazy rule, but that's what they did. And it's because the used market, there weren't enough motorcycles on the used market as well as the new market. So and at the time, his bike might have been worth about $8,000. They offered him $3,000 less than that, and he was still willing to pay it. They wanted $5,000 over list price for the Springer, plus they were ripping him off on the trade-in value. But like I said, nobody put a gun to his head. He was willing to pay this. So as we're doing the paperwork, he takes out his license. They got to make a copy of it. They look at it, and they notice that he lives in Pasco County, and this is down in Hillsborough County. And they say, whoa, we can't sell you this bike. He says, what do you mean? He said, you don't live in this county. We can only sell Harley Davidsons to people that live in this county. Crazy maybe, but there was enough people that they could do that. He was pretty mad about it. They virtually threw us out the door. And a few months later, his bike finally did come in at the local dealership. It was the same thing. They gave him much less than his trade was worth. They jacked up the price of the new bike, but he was happy to get it. In fact, this guy was so Harley crazy that he went and had a custom paint put over his purple paint, I guess like sort of like a ghost flame idea. He had 1 million little Harley Davidson emblems in the paint. It was just crazy stuff. At that time, people were getting Harley Davidson tattoos all over the place. And it was like a craze. Everybody had one. Everybody wanted one. Personally, I wasn't willing to pay 1 penny more than MSRP, so needless to say, I didn't have a Harley Davidson. In fact, I bought the first Harley in 2004. Prior to that, I had Kawasaki Nomad, I had a Honda Ace Tourer, and these were bikes that you could buy any place. There was no above MSRP. In fact, you could get a pretty good discount on these bikes. And I remember people saying, oh, you got one of those, the copy. Well, yeah, I guess it is a copy, but I paid $5,000 for this bike brand new. You paid $20,000 for a $15,000 bike, and you think you did something smart. Well, that's up to you, but I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to pay a penny over MSRP. So back in 2004, I heard about a deal that Harley was offering, the motor company. You could buy, if you're a police officer, you could buy a Peace Officer Edition. I think they came in just in dark blue or blue and silver. You had your choice of the two. And what they were doing, Harley Davidson, was saying thank you to police officers. And if you buy the Peace Officer Edition, it was $2,000 under list price. So I go down to my local dealership and I say, yeah, I want one of those Road Kings. I heard they were $2,000 less than list price. Well, the salesman, he goes and gets the sales manager. He comes over, he says, no, you heard wrong. It's not $2,000 less under list price. It's $2,000 over list price. I said, so Harley, you're telling me that Harley Davidson is thanking police officers by charging them $2,000 more than the bike should actually cost? He says, well, no, actually, if we sell a regular Road King, we're charging $5,000 over, so you're really saving some money. Well, this sounded like a bunch of bullshit to me. In fact, I knew it was. So I went on the internet and I found out that there was a dealer up in Pensacola, I believe it was, and he had a blue Peace Officer Edition Road King. I call him up on the phone. I ask him about the bike. I said, I'm a police officer. He says, as long as you have your police ID, the price is $2,000 under list. At the time, it was $17,600, I believe, for the Peace Officer Edition. It was $15,600 if you had police ID. So I went up there. I said, there's nothing added to the price? He says, no, because it's like an 8-hour drive. I didn't want to go up there and find out. It's a whole different story. But he said, no, there's nothing added to it other than tax tag and the license. And I drove the 8 hours up there with my trailer, picked up the bike, paid exactly $2,000 under list price, and I was pretty happy. But of course, at that time, the resale value of used bikes was very high as well. In fact, in 2000, here in Pasco County, we got our first Harley Davidson police bikes. And at that time, the Harley Davidson police bike was about $13,000. Plus you had to, if you added the tour pack with the lights and stuff, it was another $2,000, and you can get that locally, or you could get it actually from Harley Davidson. And the deal was, you would buy the bike for the $13,000. If you traded in a year later and it was still in good shape, you could get a brand new Harley Davidson police bike for $1. That's how good the price of the used motorcycle was. So the dealership, he's selling you, the agency, the bike at $13,000. A year later, he gets the used bike, let's say it's got 5,000 miles on it. I'm sure he also made a profit at $13,000, but now he takes that used bike and he puts a price of $20,000 or $21,000, whatever he thinks he can get for it. It's actually more than what a new Road King would cost, but you can't get the new Road King. You got to wait a year to get it. So people were buying these used police bikes and paying more for them than they would a brand new one, just because they didn't want to wait for it. And in fact, if they bought the civilian version of it, they were going to probably pay $4,000 to $5,000 over list price. Again, they didn't have a gun to your head. This was a personal choice. You could either buy it or you don't, or you could buy a Honda. But the market was so hot at this time that they were able to do that, take that trade in for $1, give you a brand new bike, as long as, and they made you sign a contract that you had to bring it back to that dealership to trade it in, because they wanted that used motorcycle. If you remember around this time too, I think around 2000, there was companies sprouting up all over the place. Indian, somebody buys the Indian name, they take an S&S motor, they put the big fat fenders on the Indian, and they were selling the crap out of those bikes too, even though, let's face it, they were not the most reliable bikes. I don't know who was manufacturing them or how, but they had all kinds of problems with oil leaks and electrical problems. And then somebody said, well, this market is so hot, let's start a new company and we'll make the Excelsior Henderson. I don't know if you remember that debacle, but that lasted about a year. They didn't make too many bikes, but people were paying big money for that. And as far as comparing it to any of the contemporary Harley Davidsons or Hondas or Yamaha, it wasn't much of a motorcycle, but people wanted it. They went out of business, I think, inside of a year. They were ripping off investors. There was all kinds of things going on. There was a used dealership down in Tampa, and they sold used bikes. And what they were doing, the owner of that dealership would get all his friends, and he'd give them $1,500 to go down to the dealership down in Clearwater to put their name on the list. The idea being, when that bike came in, they would take it, they would trailer it over so it had virtually no miles to his dealership. And so now he's got the motorcycle, let's say it's $15,000, and he had to pay another $1,500 just to get the name on the list, $3,000 in accessories, and now it comes to his dealership and he's got to make a profit. So he's going to charge about 10 grand over what the bike is worth. And he's doing this for about 4 or 5 years and actually making money at it. Believe it or not, people were willing to walk into this guy's dealership, pay $10,000 or $15,000 more just to get what's now a used Harley Davidson, because they don't want to wait a year or a year and a half to get the actual color and the model they want. Of course, when the market went down and the supply met demand, which is when they opened the factory up in Pennsylvania, little by little, the supply started to meet the demand. Well, this guy went out of business. I mean, he was stuck actually with bikes that he had way more money than they're actually worth on the new or the used market. But there's a lot of stories like that, and some of the crazy stuff you hear about. I remember when the V-Rod came out, and there was a lot of publicity about it, and people wanted that new V-Rod so bad. Somebody put on one of the forums, said, "I just got my new V-Rod," and somebody asked, "Well, how did you get it? How much did you have to pay?" The guy said, "Well, it was $16,000, and I had to pay $26,000 for it, and I had to give him time to have sex with my wife in the showroom window and give it time to draw a crowd." And I'm sure he's exaggerating, but not by much. People wanted that bike. I know somebody paid $28,000 for one of those. In the anniversary years, 2003, the hottest bike that Harley had was the Classic, the Road King Classic with the leather bags, the white wall tires, beautiful looking bike. And they had a special color for the anniversary year. It was black and silver. And I think MSRP was about $17,500, $17,600 for the bike. I saw one at a dealership. They had $37,000. They wheeled it in, and at the time, this was the only bike in the showroom. They couldn't get enough bikes. So they wheeled it into the showroom, and they put a little tag on there saying all the extras they put on the bike, and it was $37,000. And I happened to be there when they wheeled it in, and I said, "You got to be kidding. This is a 17.6 bike." He said, "Well, we put some extras on it." And I said, "Extras to $37,000? The bike didn't last one day." So, I'm sure whoever bought that, they didn't force him to do it. He wanted the bike. Plus, people thought because it was an anniversary edition, it was going to wind up being a collector's item. But actually, Harley Davidson wound up making those models with the black and silver paint, the anniversary colors, all the way up in 6 months after 2003 into 2004 model year. So now they're all over the place. And I feel sorry for anybody who paid $28,000, but I don't feel too sorry for them because they knew what they were getting. They were taking a chance. You pays your money, you take the chance, and you hope for the best. And, as little by little, the supply started to meet the demand. Of course, the price of the used bikes went down. In fact, at the sheriff's office, I think the last year that we were getting Harley Davidsons, it was around 2006. Instead of paying $1 to get the new one, it was $6,000 because the market had gone way down on used bikes, because now you could pretty much get just about any bike you wanted at any color. So, are they ripping you off? Absolutely not. You got a personal choice. You could go in and buy the bike and pay the extra money, or you don't. It's really up to you. Now, this is just my opinion on this. I'm not trying to debate anybody. If you think that the dealer charging you more money than the MSRP is a ripoff, that's your business. But like I said, nobody's putting a gun to your head. Nobody is forcing you to buy this motorcycle. It's your own personal choice. I believe in the free market. If you don't want free market, you can look at what happened in the Soviet Union. They had a motorcycle there, and it was a fixed price. It's called the Ural. It was actually a 1930s BMW that they had added a few things to over the years, but it was pretty much a 1932 BMW that they put a Russian name on it, the Ural, and if you wanted it, you paid a certain amount of money, and that was it, or you didn't buy it. I don't want the government involved in the free market. Let us decide what we want and what we want to pay for it. That's what it should be. It's called capitalism. Systems worked for a long, long time. I don't think that there's any way that you could say, well, I'd rather have the government set the price on the vehicle. That's not the way it works here in the free market. My opinion, you could like it or not like it, but either way, I hope you give me a thumbs up on this video. I hope that you subscribe, because I have some plans for, if you like this, my next one I think I'd like to do is, a lot of people ask me how I got into being a motor officer instructor, and how I started my business, and I'd love to tell you that story. I think it's entertaining, and you might find it of interest. So till next time,